everyone, and welcome to the Law and Leadership series at UDC Law. So we are going to start this semester's Law and Leadership series with a fabulous guest, although she's not really a guest, our very own Professor Saleema Snow. This is going to run about 45 minutes, and we're going to leave space at the end for questions from the audience because I want to make sure that we are respectful of our evening students who have to get to class at 6:15. So the Law and Leadership series is supposed to be a more casual, engaged opportunity for us, the UDC Law community, to get to know people who have exhibited a commitment to leadership in the social justice space. And I can really think of no better a guest to start us off than Professor Saleema Snow. So Professor Snow teaches critical race theory and a host of legal writing courses. She is the director of our legal writing program. She writes in the space of religious profiling, poverty law, and she writes about the intersectionality of gender, poverty law, and access to justice. She has a long record of service and a long professional career before getting to us that she's going to talk us through, but I am going to highlight just two. She is on the DC Bar Board of Governors and is the immediate past president of the National Association of Muslim Lawyers. So with that, welcome, Professor Snow. It is a pleasure to have you here this evening.
Thank you.
You are quite welcome. And for the first question, I am going to ask you to answer a question that I am sure all of our law students are dying to know the answer to. What does the average day of a law professor look like? What do y'all do all day?
So average day, I think for me, there is no average day. The first thing I do probably is I wake up thinking about all the things I haven't done. And then I try to put first things first, which I don't know, can mean a number of things, whether it's class prep, whether it's preparing for a conference that I'm presenting at, whether it's preparing for a committee meeting, and of course, preparing for class, which I like to think happens more than the day before, though, the day of. But I actually think that one of the things, the challenges of being a law professor, anyone who has a lot on his or her plate or their plate, is the challenge of not having enough time for the visionary things that you would like to do, that you become so task-oriented that you're not able to kind of dream and have visionary work and opportunities to think bigger than the tasks that are in front of you. One of the things that I think law professors would like to think that we have time to do is to think deeply about issues, things that really keep us up at night, to think deeply about, why did I go to law school anyhow? What was it I wanted to do? What is it that bothers me? What is it I want to change? And sometimes, again, I'm waking up thinking about all the tasks I have to do that I don't have as much time to do that. So my typical day is trying to catch up on those things. And then the visionary stuff happens usually between 11 and 3 in the morning, quite honestly. It does. I mean, that's the day.
So you said you wanted to become a law professor because you wanted to think more deeply. Do you think that's typical? Do you think that's typical for why people decide to go into academia?
No, that was probably a misleading statement a little bit. I can't say that I wanted to be a law professor. I didn't even have the words to say what it is that I wanted to do. I don't even know that I wanted to necessarily just be a lawyer. Probably lawyers and doctors were the only two professions that I really knew about as far as what a success looked like. You're either a lawyer or you're a doctor. I prayed hard to pass physics, and I prayed a gratitude prayer that we didn't have to take chemistry. So I knew I was not going to go into medicine. That I did know. So law kind of became the other option. And the more and more I saw people in our community, my parents, some of the injustices that they had. And, I grew up in a poor, all-white community, so racism was really rampant in the neighborhood that I grew up in. And there's so many things that you see happen in that journey that we call life that make you think, how do you, as cliche as it may seem, how do you make the world a better place? How do you change some of the things that have, some of the harm that has hurt your parents in particular. I think that was part of my big impetus, that I just saw how much harm had been done to my parents, and that they were struggling and good people and doing the best they could, but all the systems were working against them in so many ways. Particularly my mother, who actually had a major lawsuit against a lawyer that we should not be, had a major lawsuit against a supermarket chain in Boston, and they fired her. And in the course of firing her, she found this quote smoking gun that said, "Let's get rid of this black woman and bring in one of our own."
Ah.
So to me, that wasn't the bad part. The bad part was her lawyer, who sold her down the proverbial river and did some things that were extremely unethical. And she ended up settling the case and didn't want to settle the case. She wanted to go to trial. And there were just so many nuances in that experience that made me say, I want to be a lawyer. I want to do that. I want to make sure that there aren't many Millicent Snows who this is happening to.
So
There's so many little things.
Seeing a bad lawyer made you want to do better?
It's interesting you say that, because when I talk to law students who are interested in clerking, I said the beauty of clerking, you see some really good lawyering and some really bad lawyering. And I think that, when I would sit in the courtroom waiting for my case to be called, I was like, ooh, don't make that mistake, Saleema. So sometimes, yeah, seeing some bad lawyering makes you think, I do not want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, even my own mistakes. When I make a mistake, when I made a mistake litigating, I say, well, I'll never do that again. So mistakes, I think, are growth opportunities.
How do you find the courage to do that, though, right? So it's really easy to say mistakes are growth opportunities. And then when you live in a culture that doesn't value your version of talent, right? And doesn't value the package that you present your talent in, mistakes can feel dangerous and professionally fatal, right? So how did you get to the place where you were comfortable enough to say, you live and you learn, right? Like you do it and you figure out how to do it better next time?
Well, part of it is being 61, you get to the point where you just don't care. You're like, look, who gonna check me, boo? So that's part of it. And also, I'm going to be very transparent and say that something you said just last week or the week before made me really reflect that Black women, we have to show up and be twice as good. We have to show up and make sure we're dressed right. We have to show up and make sure we don't make those mistakes, because the cautions are devastating. And your comment about we shouldn't carry that burden, I think, is really liberating in many ways. So I cannot say that I have always felt that way, that don't worry about the mistakes, because I knew what the mistakes could or would do. But I do think that part of being a good lawyer, though, is learning from those mistakes. And in many instances, I mean, I was very fortunate to have some of the best legal training I think a lawyer could have, both in law school and after law school. And I had a team.
And I'm sorry, where did you go to law school? Just for the audience, please, just really
quick. For those who don't know, DC School of Law, the predecessor to UDC that later merged into UDC. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
But yeah, you learn from mistakes sometimes because you don't want to make the mistake again. But being in the right environment that allows you to make mistakes is what's really key.
And what is that right environment, right? Because like I always struggle with what to tell students, because I agree with you. The older you get, the more you're like, who gonna check me, boo? Right? Like, just what? I'm gonna do me and you do you. But I struggle with what to tell students who come to me and say, should I present like X? Because I recognize that X is going to be more acceptable. And until I establish myself, I'm worried about that. What do you think we should be telling students in that regard?
So one of the common questions, I self-identify as a Black Muslim woman. One of the questions I often get from Muslim women who wear hijab in particular is, should I take my hijab off for this interview? And the first response is, that's up to you. The second response is, I can't judge what your situation is, so you may really need this job, you may really want this job. But my response is usually, if you have to take your hijab off to work at this firm, do you really want to work at this firm? And I know there's some privilege embedded in that someone can just pass a job by, but I do think we have to think about what works for us. And I know, as I said, I've been very fortunate I've been very fortunate to have people who looked like me as my managers, people who had similar experiences who were my managers, managing attorneys, and executive directors. And I've been fortunate that I could be very selective about where I worked. It was not by chance that I selected UDC. I often say that, with one exception, HU, you know. There aren't any other law schools that I would consider teaching at. And this is not arrogance, this is confidence in what I bring to the table, because I don't know that they're deserving of my time. I don't know that they're deserving. And I think that's part of the challenge when we get, particularly young lawyers, when we enter into the market, to decide who is deserving of what you bring to the table. Do they
How
deserve
long did
you?
it take you to get to that point, though?
I came to law school as an older student. Not good advice for anyone, but I only applied for one job when I graduated. There was only one job that I wanted, and that was working at Neighborhood Legal Services Program to represent people living in poverty. So I think I would have probably, worked at a coffee shop rather than work someplace at a legal organization that I didn't want to work in.
What made you want to work at Neighborhood Legal Services?
Because I grew up in poverty, and I wanted to represent those living in poverty in the District of Columbia. I didn't know that that was the specific reason that I went to law school. But when I begin to kind of peel back layers of what drove me to law school and some of the experiences I had, many of the experiences were related to my family living in poverty and not having the power and opportunities that other families had. And also, Neighborhood Legal Services had really changed the trajectory of laws in the District of Columbia. We have the implied warranty of habitability because of Neighborhood Legal Services. We have the right to a jury trial because of Neighborhood Legal Services. So many of the standards that we see in landlord-tenant court were established by Neighborhood Legal Services. I say that because the mindset at NLSP was very different than what I thought other organizations, legal services organizations, were doing at the time. I actually cite Mr. Cook, who was the executive director for 30-something years, in one of my articles, because on his first day, or during our orientation, whenever that was, he would say to us, "Don't tell me what the law is, tell me what the law ought to be." And I have carried that with me because it's this idea of, who don't know the law is stacked against poor people. We all know that. People living in poverty have not had the opportunity to litigate their cases so that they're getting just results and so that we're changing appellate practice. But going into saying, your client didn't pay if you just say, well, my client didn't pay the rent, we don't have a case, and then you would not represent probably any clients coming through your door. But if you say to yourself, well, my client didn't pay the rent, so what? She has 6 kids and needs a place to live. You're going to find some novel, creative legal argument to keep your client in that door. I remember when I was practicing in Georgia, which was the next job I have after Neighborhood Legal Services, or I skipped a little, but I practiced in Georgia in Georgia Legal Services, and one of the attorneys was shadowing me when I had a housing case. And initially, the judge ruled against us. I jumped back up, said something else. Jumped back up, said something else. Jumped back up, said something else. Till opposing counsel said, "Look, can we just settle this case? Because I see you're about to file an appeal." I said, "Good man, smart decision." But the point is, you're standing there knowing, I know where my client ends up after this case. She ends up on the street. And really, it's Mr. Cook said, "Who cares what the law is? Tell me what the law ought to be." And it was just, she should have been able to stay in that home. I don't care that she hadn't paid her rent. There are other reasons. We have to think differently about rights and quote responsibilities that people have.
Yeah. So as we've got a lot of students on the call, and what would you say to those students who are trying to decide between the choice that you made, right? To pick the job that spoke to your heart, to pick the job that really advanced the mission and cause that you wanted to advance, and doing well as opposed to doing good. What would you say to those students? Do you have to make a choice? How do you choose?
I'm adamant that doing good means you're doing well. That comes, I think about my grandparents graduated 3rd grade, 4th grade. My parents, dad didn't graduate high school, mom graduated high school but didn't graduate college. So we are first in so many ways. We often don't have generational wealth in our families.
Thank you for saying that. Speak on that for just a minute.
No. Interestingly enough, just last night I spoke to someone who graduated a couple years ago, and she was contemplating whether she should take a certain job and leave a legal services position. And I was like, oh, no. She said, well, Professor Snow, let me tell you how much the job pays. I said, well, how much does the job pay? And she said, $130,000. I said, take that job. That $130,000 position was going to change a lot in her life and in her family's life. And what I think we have to remember sometimes we are the first, and with that first, I hate to say, but sometimes our check have to support a community.
Yep.
And the movement needs money. So there are all sorts of ways that we are doing a service to our community. And I think the first service is to yourself and to your family. And then once you're making that money, decide what you want to do with it. Do you want to give it to your religious organization? Do you want to just help this person not get their car repossessed for that month? And do you want to try to go to DC Bar Advice and Referral Clinic? Every month they have a free advice and referral clinic so you can come in and help people living in poverty and assist them in that way so you feel connected, that you're still using your legal skills to help those who can't afford a lawyer. I really think we have to stop thinking, particularly, it's a very privileged statement in many ways, to suggest that students, particularly our students, I think, because we promote ourselves as being both public interest law school, but also an access law school, but to think that our students are not doing the right thing when they go to a firm, that they're not doing the right thing when they go to, someplace and make a lot of money. There are so many ways that we help our communities and also help ourselves.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that, because I think that that is a part of the conversation that is so rarely transparent. I was doing work early in my career at a nonprofit, paid everybody across the board $24,000 a year. And I was there fighting it. I know, right? I don't know what I was thinking. But I was eating peanut butter and jelly and making a giant pot of spaghetti every year because I didn't want to ask my folks for money. I wanted to be an adult in that moment. And I remember having a conversation with a colleague who had not been paid in 6 months. 6 months. And he had not noticed it because he was living off of a trust fund. And it was at that moment that the light bulb went off for me, like, what in the world? All equal ain't equal.
So if you look at, it's interesting, Georgia Legal Services, they had this picture of, I don't know, a group of attorneys from the 60s. Not one Black attorney was in that picture. Now, we had the Reggies, I believe Dean Britton is a former Reggie, Judge Sullivan was a Reggie, Willie Cook was a Reggie. So you have a number of Black attorneys who were Reggies and worked in legal services program. And, some stayed, some went on to do some other great things. But working in legal services was something that was a privilege, because who can live off of $20,000 a year? When I started my legal services job, the salary was $19,000. I was so happy that the day I started, the salary went up to $30,000. So
that's a huge jump. That's a huge jump.
I mean, it's not only a huge jump, but I don't know, 19,000. I had a child at the time, and I just don't know if I could have done it. You figure it out in many instances, but you say you get tired of oodles and noodles after a while.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Although you can sauce them up with bacon bits and with tuna fish. Not that I know. I'm just saying.
Dean Hutchins, come on now.
The saltiness helps you retain the water and feel.
You gotta get you away from that swine system.
You can do mangoes. There's soy. All right.
Okay.
So you were talking to us a little bit about, so you've mentioned a couple of things, and I want to pick up on the thread. So you talked about moving from neighborhood legal defenders, neighborhood legal services to Georgia. And you talked earlier when you were talking, you talked about being able to run a thread through your work, right? That was sort of anchored in your upbringing, in your childhood. As you were moving through your career, were you intentional about making your moves? or was it happenstance? I think a lot of students really struggle with the notion that the first job they take is going to set the path for their entire career, right? And they've got to
Right.
get it right that first time. And if they don't get it right that first time, oh, all hell's going to break loose in terms of what their career is going to look like. For
So what I'm
you,
going to
was
be
that your
intentional
truth?
about, and one, I'm going to be intentional. One thing, my dog Mops is insisting on coming over here for a treat or something. So I'm going to tell him to sit down for a second.
So I
So
think we should see Mops because my dog is hiding under my table right now. I think it's like they know that you're on.
he does, because he never does it. So I'm like, what are you doing? Was it intentional? I can't say it was intentional. Maybe a little bit more than happenstance, but I can't say it was really intentional. It was really life changes that really had me shift from neighborhood legal services to Georgia legal services. I also did some work at Advocates for Justice and Education, representing students with disabilities and trying to do some work early on in the school to prison pipeline, stopping school systems from pushing students of color out of school into the criminal justice system. Yeah, I don't know that it was as intentional as I would have liked for it to have been. Um, but I've also been very fortunate that I was never really forced into a position that I didn't want to be in, even though I ended up in some positions that I realized I didn't want to be in. But I don't think I was forced into a position that I didn't want to be in. And when it comes to academia, I actually have always enjoyed teaching. A good friend of mine opened a charter school during my first year of law school, and she asked would I teach an
High
English
school
class for her.
or elementary school?
Charter school,
Okay.
high school charter school, yes. And she asked would I teach an English class. I said, oh, I'm in law school, I really don't have time. But anyhow, I taught an English class for her because I just really enjoy teaching. And at some point, I said I would love to be able to merge the two things I enjoy, which is teaching and the law. I never really even knew that meant academia.
Mm-hmm.
So once I realized, oh, that's called being a law professor. That was after 16 years of practice, mind you, that I realized that's called being a law professor.
Right.
Even then, I felt that I didn't have the secret memo. I thought you just loved teaching, you had good practice background, and you came and you taught. Oh, I didn't know I was supposed to have written some articles about the things that I care about and that I'm passionate about. So, in that sense, I think many of our career choices feel that they're not planned because we just don't know what the planning looks like. We don't know what it means or what you have to do to become a law professor, which is why I really welcome when people call me and say, I'm really interested in academia. Should I apply for this position? I'm like, well, you're not quite ready to apply for the position, but let's figure out what you need to do to put yourself in to become a viable candidate, how you
Yeah.
can become a viable candidate to apply for the position. And there are many instances they would be great law professors, but they're not as marketable as they could be because they too didn't have the secret memo. They too
Yeah.
didn't know that, they're writing a couple of op-eds, and I said, yeah, it's not the same. It's not quite what
Yeah.
we're looking for. So
Yeah.
let's talk about how you take those wonderful narratives you have in your op-eds and turn them into scholarship.
Yeah. Yeah. That is one of my great frustrations, the secret society feel.
Hmm.
To getting into the legal academy. Like you, I had no clue, and it was just luck that I had, a law school classmate who was teaching and pulled me aside and said, "The meat market is not a butcher shop." Right.
No, well, this is the thing, though. I think I'm very fortunate that I entered academia non-traditionally. I entered non-traditionally. Actually, when I applied for the position at UDC, there were other candidates who had so much more experience than I had. So I do want to stress the importance of, there are many ways to get in that door. There's a side door, there's a back door,
Mhm.
there's, someone can even open the basement door. And in many ways, I came in through the basement door. When I started at UDC, I worked in career services and asked the director of legal writing, I'd love to teach a writing class here. And she said, okay, sure, as an adjunct. And really, part of my narrative in my application is you may find people who have some more skills than I do, but I can learn the skills. Don't worry. I'll know more about legal writing than any of them, but none of them will care about students and work as hard and have as much love for this institution as I will. So I do think that even when on paper, even when everyone says you're not quite ready, that we do have to ask ourselves, as we do in life in many instances, what's the side door? What's the back door? What's the basement door? How else can I get my foot in the door? So sometimes we do have to be careful when people say, oh, no, you're not ready, because some of us and to others are never ready. So we just have to. I have a friend who was working as a judge, and people said, you're not ready. I said, well, I think I'm ready.
Yeah. What would you say to students who are thinking about getting into academia? Would you suggest to them that they pursue the side or basement door, or would you suggest to them that they line things up now to come in a more traditional route? What would you suggest?
I often think that you work backwards. Meaning, if this is what I want to do, what do I want that resume, that CV to look like in order to be a viable candidate? And so working backwards, where are my holes? So first thing, know what is the traditional expectation? And can I meet that traditional expectation? What do I have to do to fill in the gaps if I can't meet that traditional expectation? Academia in many ways, I think about it, I said, well, it's really a dream job that people are paying me to teach students I deeply care about and to sit and think about issues that bother me, and I get to write about them and to talk about them. I mean, it's a dream job in many ways. Because I come from a practice background, because UDC really looks at practice probably a little differently than most other law schools, I do think it's very helpful to have some practice before you come into academia. And even if you're going to Harvard, where some of the professors may not have much practice background, I know one of the complaints some students at Harvard have is, I can't believe this person has never practiced. And again, that's a norm in academia, but I don't know if it's a norm that I think really works well for people who are interested in going into practice. I think it helps to have practitioners, something that UDC does quite well, that we have a number of our faculty who were strong practitioners before entering into academia. So for students who want to do, I think the first thing you do is you talk to someone, whether it's any member on the faculty. Of course, I'm always willing to share what my trajectory was, but I think also talking to other people who have had, quote, traditional trajectories into academia. But that's the first step. Talk to people about it. I mean, we use that traditional word mentor, but mentorship looks very differently to different people.
Right. So you said that you love teaching, and I think I get a window into why. Have you ever had a job you hated? Like hated, like you could not wait to get out of there at 5 o'clock?
Let's rewind to my first job when I was 13, having to make them think I was 14 at an ice cream store where I had to walk, I'm going to say 2 miles.
You hate working in an ice cream store. That's like next to working in a cake store. That's my dream job.
That's what I thought. I said, oh, this is wonderful. I'm working, first of all, it was my first job. It's an ice cream store. It sounded wonderful. It took me forever just to walk there because no bus ran there. We didn't have a car. So I'm walking to this ice cream store. And I said to my parents years later, I said, it was like child abuse. I got off work at midnight and I'm walking home. So what were you thinking? Letting this 13-year-old walk home at midnight? But do you know how
get
horrible
some experience, you'll learn.
Exactly. You had to put your hand in the ice cream thing. There was this metal thing around it. And this probably has been the most, I don't know. It seems like the health department would have closed every ice cream store down. Your hands you would cut your hands all the time from the metal around the ice cream ring. Yeah, it sounded like a wonderful job.
From the cardboard, like the thing around the cardboard?
Yeah, I actually hated that job. And I've worked as waitresses, loved those jobs because you made so much money in a short amount of time. But the ice cream store, my first job, was probably my most miserable job. I think as a lawyer, the job that I can't say I hated it, but I knew it wasn't for me. Does that count? A job that I knew that wasn't for me?
That counts.
So I did some court-appointed criminal defense cases, and really just started off doing misdemeanor cases, prostitution, possession of marijuana, and it was very stressful knowing that someone's freedom literally, everyone tried to tell me it's not you, it's a judge or the jury who decides, but you're walking away saying their liberty left, is really in my hands. And I was excited about doing this work because I really enjoy trial work. And I saw some of DC public defenders in court when I would be waiting for a case to be caught. I was like, wow, that's great. Oh, they're so amazing. And I wanted to be like them. But it only took a couple of cases to know that was not for me. And then I have this vivid memory, too, of a DC Superior Court judge who questioned my billing. And it has kind of stuck with me because I thought about, what is this narrative really saying? She said, well, you've billed a lot. This is just a possession of marijuana case. Why is your bill so high? I said, Your Honor, my billable hours are twice as much as what I have submitted to the court. And she said, why? It's just I said, my client doesn't, and literally I said this, unfortunately. I said, my client does not want to wear silver bangles for 1 day, 1 hour, 1 minute. She paid my hours, but I thought about it, that we become, I think sometimes judges and court systems and lawyers too, become so jaded that it's no big deal that someone is detained, that it's no big deal that someone gets a 30-day sentence. And I just, it was emotionally tolling, very emotionally tolling on me. I realized that work was not for me, which is why I look at good criminal defense lawyers and say, my hat goes off to them. I think we have some of the best criminal defense lawyers at the Public Defender Service in DC.
It's an amazing office, an absolutely incredible office. How do you avoid that, though, right? How do you avoid becoming jaded? Because I remember exactly what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I remember particularly when I was prosecuting, right? Particularly when I was thinking about what sentence I was going to recommend to a judge, and getting to a place where days mean nothing, years mean something, but because you're dealing with such just an overwhelming crush of caseload and an overwhelming crush of sentences being handed out, that there is a part of you, it's almost like a hydraulic pressure, to become jaded, if nothing else, it's like callousing your soul, so that you don't have to reckon emotionally with the damage of the system. How can young lawyers avoid that? Is the only way to do it to opt out?
I don't think so. When I'm teaching court, anything dealing with persuasive writing or client-centered lawyering, I often, say to students that the law is a human experience. And we have to drill down to ourselves that the law is a human experience. Because at some point we kind of detach ourselves from our clients. We detach ourselves, if we're a prosecutor, from even the person sitting on the other side of the V, if it's opposing counsel. We begin to forget and humanize the issues that are in the law and the people that are in the law. Even when it comes to judges, I mean, I've had some great judges and some horrible judges. And I've left court often very angry because the judge was ill prepared and, said some things that I probably should not have thought, let alone said. But realizing that the law is a human experience and finding ways that you humanize your client in particular, and that you realize that we often say, would you want, if that were your sister, what would you do? If that were your brother, your mother, your father, your uncle, your cousin, your niece, your nephew, how would you feel about these issues? And that's part of the challenge. I think students, when they transition from their classes into our clinics, that they begin to have to recognize this is no longer a class where you're talking about these issues. This is the class where you are representing someone and addressing these issues. So you really do have to begin to think about, how is this issue affecting my clients? Well, the client wasn't home, so I'm going to go back to class. No, the client wasn't home, so you sit in your car. You try to figure out, what laundromat does my client use? Let me drive to the laundromat, see if the client is there.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have got, I actually just glanced over at the chat and realized that we've got a whole ton of comments and questions in the chat, and I'm going to get to those in 1 second, but I got a couple more questions for
Okay.
you. Young lawyers who want to make a difference, right? That's who we get at the law school. We get, and that's what I love about our students, is that they want to use their privilege as licensed attorneys to make the world better. Any recommendations or advice for how they should go about doing it?
Make a difference for yourself, then make a difference for your family, then make a difference for your community. I would start small and build out, whether it's pro bono work, whether it's legal services, whether it's working at a firm and asking, can you work on one of the pro bono cases, whether it's government work. And, you know, I love that alum who reach out. I had a student who reached out about taking a job at Department of Justice, and one division she was interested in, one division she wasn't interested in. And, you know, you're a former prosecutor. 20 years ago, you could have never convinced me that a prosecutor can do good work. I mean, literally, you could not convince me. And now this idea of thinking about how much discretion a prosecutor has. I think about the cop on the street. You know, how much discretion does that cop have? And the lesson and lecture that many Black parents give their child, probably parents of color, period, that Justice Sotomayor even mentioned, we give them the talk. We give them the talk that keep your hands on the steering wheel, talk nice to that officer. And I used to say to my son all the time, the police are not calling your parents. They're locking you up. They're not going to do the same thing that they may do to your white friends. Your white friends, they're going to call their parents. They're not going to call me. But understanding that there are so many ways that we make differences, so many ways that we make a difference. And again, even if you want to be a prosecutor, you can make a difference. And again, I would have never said that. Because I'm like, oh, you're just locking up Black and brown people. What's the point? You're putting them in jail. You have the power not to put them in jail. You have the power to push for sentencing.
Yeah, I will always say that I had more power as a 5 years out of law school prosecutor than I'm not going to say ever have as a defense attorney, because I've done some systemic cases that made a big difference. But in the day-to-day, I had far more power as a prosecutor. And what is even scarier to think about is that a police officer on the street, maybe no college, maybe a couple of years of college, has released more people and exempted more people out of the criminal justice system than I ever have as a prosecutor or as a defense attorney. The levers in that system they trickled up, not down. Yeah. All right, couple more questions for you, and then because we've got to wrap before so that our evening students can get to class. But a couple more questions for you, and then we're gonna do a lightning round, because I gotta do a lightning round, and then we're gonna turn it over to questions to our attendees. So if you have a question, attendees, please type it in the chat, and I will scroll through the chat in just a minute. Okay. Second to last question, penultimate question. Is there anything that your law professors did not tell you that you wished they had told you before you got out of law school?
That practicing law is emotionally draining. Clients die. Judges are hostile. Opposing counsel can be extremely adversarial. It's easy to have to need more time and not have it. It's emotional toll that I don't think I anticipated. One student, she was this really third-year student. She said, or maybe she was in her second year. She mentioned, "Oh my gosh, law school is so hard. It's so difficult." I said, "Listen, practicing law is also difficult." She said, "Oh, I might as well just drop out now then." But I do think you get used to it in a different kind of way. But I don't think I was really prepared for the emotional toll that practicing law can have. And I probably would have taken a different approach had I known that. I do think that many of us at UDC Law try to instill wellness into our students. Sometimes I think our curriculum contradicts us talking about wellness, but finding ways that we continue to promote wellness is so critical, because I had no idea that the emotional toll that practicing law would have on me, because there are just so many difficult moments. Particularly if you're working with some of the communities that some of us plan to work with, that many of our communities have just come to us with so much trauma, and so many of our cases are crisis driven.
And I think it's so refreshing that we're finally in that place, because, I'm sure when you went to law school, I know when I went to law school, the approach was not that. The approach was like, suck it up, buttercup, right? Like, life is tough, deal.
Okay, Dean Hutchins, true transparency. 2 years ago, I was told students, start drinking your coffee now, suck it up, get used to it, welcome to law school. It really has been, many lessons learned from COVID for sure.
Yeah.
And one of the lessons learned is this idea of compassion, of being good to ourselves, that success looks different than what we thought it looked. So I was probably that person saying, suck it up. And not so long ago, not just when I was in law school. And you're thinking that you're telling students, suck it up, because you think that's what they have to do to succeed. And how we succeed is taking care of ourselves.
Do you think that the profession has moved, though? Right? So are we setting students up in a way that is not going to benefit them when they get out of the profession? Because I agree with you. There's a lot of legal education that has changed. I'm not sure the profession has, though.
I think the profession is trying to. At some point, we have to continue to question why lawyers have, some of the highest alcoholism rates and addiction rates and depression rates and I don't know where we fall with suicide, but I know it's high. But we have to start questioning that. And I do think that the profession is rethinking that in some instances. Actually, I think it is shifting a little bit. Some of my colleagues who are working at firms are often even saying that billable hours is the hustle is real, but that the demand has shifted, and how they can bill hours is shifting also. And I think we're doing that in law school, thinking about how, I know one of our colleagues, Professor Karen, allows students to bill some hours for some wellness things. And lawyering process and moot court, we allow students to include in their professional development new wellness strategies that they're trying. I don't think we're setting students up. I think we're setting them up to figure out how they succeed so that they can continue to practice law and not become a burnt out lawyer.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that I would encourage all the students on the call to remember is that by the time you realize you're burnt out, it's too late.
Good point.
So be proactive about that. All right. Last question for you before lightning round. I hope you're ready for the last.
I am not.
I am so excited about it. All right. The last question for you. Legal profession, and we touched on this earlier, legal profession is one of the least diverse in the country, least diverse. It has not moved despite years of us talking about it as a profession. It is not that much more diverse than when I was in law school or when you were in law school today, which is tragic and sad and frustrating. What would you say to our students who are moving out into that profession? What advice would you give them as they are climbing the career ladder?
You have to surround yourself with a network of people who fulfill different purposes, a network of legal professionals who will be honest with you, professionals who can assist you in navigating different decisions such as salaries, such as should I take this job and not that job, professionals who will even help you to moot. And this is the key. This is where we often go wrong. We think that our, quote, mentors have to look like us. And many of us have mentors who look, I, again, self-identify as a Black Muslim woman. I have mentors who are older white men and Jewish. I have a mentor who is a Black Muslim woman. and a lawyer and very successful. But we surround ourselves often with people who are just like us, but we're trying to navigate into circles where people are not like us. So having a diverse group of people around you is important. And I do want to say that for us at UDC, we have some amazing alum who are just ready to help and assist, and I don't think we use our alumni network as much as we could.
Yep.
So that's definitely, I know students probably say, well, how can I build a network? How do I get to know those people? You just have to reach out. That's one thing about lawyers. We love to talk, and so when someone reaches out and says, "Can you talk to me about?" We're like, "Oh, sure, I'd love to talk to you about that." Yeah.
Very true. Very, very, very true. All right. Lightning round. 5 questions. You got to say the first thing that comes to the top of your head. And
Okay.
then I see you in the chat. I am going to get to your questions in the chat. All right. Question 1. What is your least favorite word?
Irregardless, it's not a word.
Zombie apocalypse. You can pick 2 people. Who do you want on your team?
Husband and my son.
Okay. First celebrity crush.
Michael Jackson.
He's my boyfriend. You can't take him. Last song you danced to.
Robin S. You got to show me love.
Oh, the classic.
You know it.
Gotcha. Yep. All right. And last one for the lightning round. Ask permission or beg forgiveness.
Permission.
Okay.
Permission.
Thank you. All right. With that group, I'm going to turn it over to the chat for questions from our group. Oh, you're going to love the first mini comments. We love Professor Snow. Absolutely love Professor Snow. Oh my God, Professor Snow.
I love you back. True, real talk. I love you back.
They're gonna let the Howard stuff slide. HU. I think they mean the real HU Hampton. Right. We got a bunch of comments about non-traditional students.
So for non-traditional students, just to say, I was 33. I had 1 child when I started law school, and I was raising 4 when I finished.
And that's a lot to be a law student doing that.
Yeah.
That's a lot. As Professor Ching notes, Judge Harry T. Edwards observed that the only way to avoid being stereotyped is to be everywhere. I got some shout outs on my Oodles of Noodles additions, including the addition of hot sauce. All right. What other questions? Okay, what advice do you have for students who are passionate about law, but who are unwilling to compromise their authenticity or are hesitant to allow the professionalism of law to have autonomy over their life?
That's a great question. We spend a lot of energy code switching, and it's taxing. And again, I say this from somewhat of a slight, I never feel I have privilege, but now I recognize I do have levels of privilege, that I am a firm believer in you being your authentic self and being unapologetically whatever you are. And I tell you all the time, I'm unapologetically Black, unapologetically Muslim, unapologetically a feminist. And the stress that comes with not having to consistently code switch and be something else, it's just rewarding. I think it's rewarding. And again, there's a certain level of privilege because sometimes we're put in situations. I mean, listen, I put on a nice suit and go into some receptions where I'm like one of very few Black women in a room of 300 or 400, and I walk in the room and I go, here we go.
Yep.
So those times will happen, but I also have noticed that I have to say this, that Ed Cook, husband of our dear Professor Wilhelmina Rubin Cook, mentioned how Wilhelmina was so committed to loving one another. And I think about how when we open ourselves up to that, the same people I walk into board meetings with and walk into a room with and say, are the same people that I become really good friends with and later walk into the same board meeting and say, "Oh, how's your son? Well, what happened? Oh my gosh, he won the soccer game." So it's really interesting how that human connection that sounds so cliche really does exist. Oh, by the way, I just finished my term with the DC Bar Board of Governors, so I guess I didn't update my bio on that. Yeah.
Okay.
I want to make sure I correct that.
Mental note, mental
Yeah,
note.
yeah, yeah.
All right, we have another question from a student. How do you navigate the disappointment you may feel when even the spaces that are created for Black men and women still are not equitable?
Woo wee. That is a question. So I am the first to be very honest with you that I feel a little angry sometime when the few spaces that we have are not respected. I'm a big proponent of respecting space. And part of respecting space also means that if you feel that it was a space created for you, then we have conversations with people so that they understand what it looks like when we respect people's spaces. Um, and I think that goes back to, the lesson that Wilhelmina and Professor Reuben Cook left us with is loving one another. That I like to think that most of us will operate in a position of good. In Islam, there's an expression that you're supposed to think of 72 excuses before you blame someone for something. So, I call my husband. He didn't call me back. He better answer that phone. Why didn't he call me back? And by the time I get to excuse number one, he left his phone at home. He's in a meeting. His phone is turned off. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm over it. So I do think that as we think about spaces that were created, like an HBCU, spaces that were created for communities of color, spaces that we didn't have, where we didn't have access to other opportunities, and now we have access to some opportunities. And if we feel that that space isn't being respected, I actually think thinking about how do we as leaders, quite honestly, going back to lawyers as leaders, how do we as leaders learn to really work with people to show what a shared space look like? What does shared space look like?
Yeah. Right. We got another question, and I think we have time for one more after this. But another question, what do you do? This is a tough one. What do you do to keep going when you feel like giving up when life hits you hard?
Yeah. Sometimes you just really have to remember the blessings in everything. I'm not trying to get esoterical on you at all, but you really do. Listen, I'm the girl from the projects in Mattapan. I am a daggone law professor. And sometimes I have to remind myself of that. Not that I'm not deserving or worthy of it, but sometimes we forget that we have so many blessings in front of us. And the words of Drake, started from the bottom, now I'm here. And you really have to think about that because there are so many people everyone on this call or in this on this on this discussion, we are all privileged that we are law students, members of this community. There are so many people who are not. I did a presentation yesterday for the university on recovery and addiction. And, but for the grace, there go but I in so many ways. And, I've never struggled with addiction, but you realize what is it that, why was I chosen, if you will, to have these opportunities that so many others did not have? And it really is that the glass half full mentality that we have to hold on to. Because life is difficult. Law school is hard. Law school is hard, and some days it's miserable. But what I will say, UDC is so special. When I talk to my classmates, we all loved law school. We enjoyed the experience in so many ways. I promise you, so few other lawyers I talk to can say they enjoyed their law school experience. Yes, you have a miserable day. You're studying hard. But generally, I think most of us who graduate from this law school enjoy the experience. We enjoy the relationships that we have built. We enjoy whether it's with our classmates, with our professors. So really thinking about, particularly during COVID, we've seen how hardship has hit families and communities, and we're really fortunate. Even some of us in this community had COVID hit us really hard at UDC. But really looking for something that get you to the next day, get you through the next hour. And it's there, it's there. We just have to sometimes, dig a little deeper and figure out what is it that allows you to give you peace, whether it's, working out, whether it's meditation, whether it's your church, mosque, or synagogue, whether it's, whatever is it that gives you peace, I think is important also.
Great. And I really want to echo up what you're saying or elevate up what you're saying and remind the students that there is a difference between gratitude and resignation. There's a difference between finding the good in something and accepting that your situation will always be your situation. And if you can, it's nuanced, but it's different. And if you can find the difference and really sit in a place of gratitude, not a space of, this is always going to be what it is, so I'm just going to accept it, and I'm just resigned to accept it. It makes a huge difference. What do they say? The man used to complain that he had no shoes until he met the man with no feet.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So with that, I want to say thank you, Professor Snow. You have started our semester off very well. I am hoping that you will read the comments because they are literally a love letter to you. And so I am hoping you will see them. Thank you to all of our attendees for joining and sharing in this very special conversation. The next Law and Leadership will be on October 26th with Jason Vini. He is a partner at Murphy Brenner and practices labor law. But thank you. You have started off our semester so well. Everybody have a great night.
Thanks, Tina.